All right, so before you look at this graph and scream, no, don't make me do schoolwork again, please just bear with me for a moment. It's going to be easy to understand and you'll be better for it in a sec. Okay, so what we're looking at on the y-axis is level of arousal, and then on the x-axis is time. So as we go from left to right, that is time basically taking place. So when we're looking at this red line, we're seeing basically we're humming along at normal levels, and then we kind of dip down. This is typically brought on by a stressful stimulus, and then we get used to that stress, and so we get into this resistance phase, we get used to it, and then after a while we hit kind of this tipping point that leads into this exhaustion phase where typically injury happens or burnout happens, oftentimes combined with each other. And so I want to talk about a couple examples and kind of the story behind them, okay? So one of the things I hear a lot of is we're humming along at work and we're feeling good and we have a balanced work life, and then all of a sudden something happens. Let's say, for example, you at your company have someone who quits and now you have to take on their role, so now you're doing two roles. And maybe it's temporary and they say it's temporary, but really it lags on for a couple months or something like that. So now you've entered into the stressful alarm phase and your level of arousal goes down, you're like, exhausted and things aren't doing great. You don't change much because you're just trying to survive. And so over time you get used to it and you enter into this resistance phase, and you're working, you're doing your best, but realistically, this isn't sustainable. And you're begging your boss like, hey, we need to hire someone for this position. I can't do this on my own. But sooner or later, maybe it's sooner, and unfortunately so, because you hit this exhaustion phase and you can't handle it anymore, your body can't handle it anymore, and you get injured and burned out at the same time. That is something that happens all the time and can lead to injury, and that is a non-physical aspect of something that can cause an injury. Okay, let's go to the next example. I have up here relationships. So one of the examples that I hear is, let's say you're going through a breakup. It could be a divorce, it could be a boyfriend or a girlfriend that you guys have parted ways, or something else. And let's say that this relationship, maybe it's a work relationship, maybe it's a family relationship, could be those two. That relationship's going along really well, and then that big thing happens and you guys part ways, or there's stress or tension there, and now you enter this alarm phase. It's stressful. You're losing energy, you're burning extra energy, and you're not feeling great about it. So then you eventually kind of get used to it. You jump on the kind of cycle that often happens in relationships, and you enter into this resistance phase. And from that, you're doing pretty okay, but you're still feeling the effects of it. Over time, you hit this tipping point and go dip into this exhaustion phase, and now you just can't handle it anymore. And that's not your fault. There's a tipping point for everybody, and your body has one as well as your mind. And so yeah, you can oftentimes get into that position, and that can be another cause that can lead into an injury and putting you more in a position of predisposal to injury. So we'll go to the next one, nutrition. I am not a nutritionist, but in all aspects, if you spend 80% of the time eating decently well, you'll probably do pretty well. But let's say, for instance, that doesn't happen. Let's say you're eating 80% of the time pretty well, and then all of a sudden something switches. It could be a stressful stimulus. Maybe, for instance, let's say you have someone that breaks up with you, or you break up with someone else, and let's say it's back to the relationships thing a little bit, where a relationship causes your diet to fluctuate, and let's say it makes you so that you're eating poorly 80% of the time. So now your body enters into the stressful alarm phase. Over time you get used to it and you enter into this resistance phase, but it's not sustainable, and eventually you hit a tipping point that causes an exhaustion phase, and your body can't handle it anymore, and it leads to an injury, or at least is a component of that injury. That happens all the time. I talk to people all the time. They're like, this happened, and that's just, I haven't been on my diet. It could even be something smaller than just something big like that. It could be like, I've just kind of fallen off the wagon of eating healthy, and I've been eating like crap. So the next one's pretty big, sleep. This one I hear constantly. Almost any injury that I see in here has a component of this. Definitely 80% of the time, people aren't sleeping well, and it enters into this alarm phase once that transition happens, and it's stressful to the system, and then you kind of enter into that resistance phase, and people live here for so long. They get used to not operating on good sleep, and that causes a whole host of problems. You're not able to accurately execute the same thing the next day, and it builds up and it builds up, and you basically require caffeine to get you through the day or some other type of stimulant, and you eventually enter into this tipping point that causes this exhaustion phase to take hold, and your body can't handle it anymore, and then you get injured, or at least it's a component of your injury. It sounds like I'm on a broken record, but seriously, this stuff is so helpful to understand because I'm sure a lot of you can relate to this. Also, let's think about exercise. So let's say you're exercising at good levels, not too much, not too little, and then all of a sudden you decide, okay, I am going to try to train for a marathon. And your body enters the stressful alarm phase because now you've progressed too fast, too soon. Your frequency, your volume, or the amount of load that you're taking on has basically put your body in a stressful state, and so you enter into this alarm phase, but eventually you get used to it, you get into the resistance phase, only to eventually hit a tipping point because it's too fast, too soon, or too frequent, and you hit into this exhaustion phase and your body can't handle it anymore, leading to potential injury or being a big component of that injury. And I use this example of exercising too much because at least where I'm at in Orange County, this happens a lot. And I talk to people a lot about this. Another one that's maybe not as obvious is your environment can change. So common examples of this is, let's say you got a new desk and you haven't really messed with the height. It's a little different than your previous height, so your body's not used to it, and you spend a lot of time at the desk. Let's say you're a tennis player and you got a new racket and it's a little heavier than your other racket, and now you're having to get used to that, but it's a little bit too much too soon. And now your body enters into this stressful alarm phase, and here we go again, resistance phase, we get used to it, but we hit a tipping point and the exhaustion phase happens and we can't handle it anymore. Our bodies give way and it leads to an injury. Sometimes, like for instance with the tennis example, you're holding on to a new racket, it's a bigger grip or it's a heavier racket. This can happen pretty quick, and sometimes you skip through the resistance phase and you're just stressed out, and then all of a sudden it leads right to the exhaustion phase and now you're injured. That can happen pretty fast. Sometimes this takes years. It just depends. And I want to talk lastly about the physical component, because I did mention that is a big deal. And I don't want us to forget about that, but I'm changing the order because I think some of this other stuff sometimes is more important than the physical, because our body has a good capability of healing itself. So let's imagine we're a muscle. Let's say we're a hamstring and we are a sprinting athlete. We're Usain Bolt and we're humming along, hamstring's feeling pretty good, and then all of a sudden we decide that we're gonna up our training significantly. And the hamstring's feeling good, and then all of a sudden there's a lot of stress on the hamstring, and now we enter into this alarm phase, stressful phase. And we're Usain Bolt and we're a good athlete, so we get used to it and we think, okay, I can handle a couple weeks of this. I think I got this. Hamstrings, like, I got this. I can do this for us. We enter into this resistance phase, we get used to it, and then the training doesn't really change and we're still at this elevated level, and all of a sudden we're like, okay, I can't do this anymore. We hit the tipping point, we get to an exhaustion phase, and all of a sudden, we're doing a sprint, and then pop, you hear that hamstring go. We strain the hamstring, and our body just couldn't handle it anymore. And so we lead to an injury that can set us back, when really we probably could have been a little bit smarter in terms of our programming and not doing too much too soon, too often. And so I want to go through all these examples, and I hope you guys can see yourself in some of these and how you can kind of go up and down the graph before your injury. Do this with your own injury. Say, okay, I was feeling pretty good, and then, oh yeah, this might have happened, or maybe it's a component of all these things. I would go through all of them and say, okay, what's work been like? What's relationships been like? What's nutrition? What's sleep, exercise, environment? And then we can talk about the physical with us. This will help you be a better detective and be better at understanding the cause of your injury so that you can get out of pain faster, create a better healing environment so that you can do the things that you love sooner rather than later. And then after that, you can prevent it from happening in the first place, which is really what I want for all of y'all, because I would rather see you once and never again than constantly keep seeing you. I would rather you say, wow, I learned a lot, I've improved so much, I can live a better life, and maybe only have to see us if something random happens or something that's unpreventable. So yeah, I hope this was useful. Let me know. I think this general adaptation graph helps a lot, and it helps me understand it a lot and explain it to people. So yeah, do some reflection on some of this stuff, ask yourself some good questions, and let me know what you think. Thanks.